Hello everyone. Okay, right, in today's video we're going to look at using images like we did in the last lesson, but today using them to create buttons which we can use in a menu screen. Okay, so the product we are going to look for today is going to hopefully look something a bit like this. I'm going to create a menu screen. We've got some sprites here. We have images loaded into on the screen, 3 sprite images and 3 buttons which can be clicked on to create actions. If you look in the background there, it says start game, options, and this last one, if I click on it, closes. So we can actually assign and give it actions. Okay, so we're going to have a look at creating a menu screen for games today. The code, before you get started, you will need to download some three images which are provided for you on the links on YouTube, 3 images, and the template code. The template code will look something like this. Okay, so I've given you some very simple template code to get started. It's got some constants here for colors, the screen size, width and height. We've got our basics for setting up the screen, and then our game loop. All it's got in it is a loop for checking actions and our clock and flipping the display at the end. Okay, so very simple. In fact, if we run our template code, all you've got is a little screen here with a slightly different grey colour I've given you to make it look different from a normal black room. Okay, so let's get started. So the very first thing we'll look at today is actually drawing some text onto the screen, having the name of the game at the top of the screen. Okay, now we have used text and fonts before. Okay, I'm going to show you a slightly different and better way of doing it today, however. Okay, so I'm going to make some space in my code here, so I've got some space ready to use. Okay, and just like before, we need to load a font. Okay, so I'm going to make a variable called font, and I'm going to go equals pygame.font, although slightly different this time. I'm going to go dot sysfont, okay, or system font, and in here I'm going to go Arial Black, which is a font that is loaded on my computer that I know. Okay, so this one's slightly different before. Before we had pygame.font, and in brackets we had the name of the font .ttf. What we were doing before was actually loading a font from the same folder as the game. Okay, what I'm showing you today is how to load a system font, a font that's on the computer already. So font equals pygame.font.sysfont, and the name of the font and the size of the font. Now that's okay if you know the name of the font, but what if you don't know the name of the font? Okay, so there is a piece of code you can do here, which is pygame.font.getFonts, bracket bracket. That will retrieve all the fonts in the system, and to show them on the screen, all I'm going to do is print that out. So I'm going to put a print command around that. Okay, that will now output, if I run my game here, run this template code. Okay, now just in behind here it says squeeze text. It might look different on yours. If I double click on that, in the console here it's output all of the fonts on my computer. Now this is my home personal computer. I've got a lot of fonts on here. Okay, yours might not have as many of that, but you can see here the specific names of the fonts, and basic ones like Arial, Arial Black, which I'm using today, and all the other fonts on this computer, Korea New and stuff like that. These are the font you need to use in Pygame when you are calling the font. So in today's example, Arial Black, Comic Sans you've got there, Comic Sans MS and things. So those are the things you're going to write in your game when you're calling the name of the font here. Okay, I don't really need that anymore, so for the moment I'm going to get rid of that again, but just helpful to know. Okay, so now we've called the font and we've saved it in. Now we've loaded a font in. We need to actually do some writing or drawing onto the screen with it. Before, we drew each line of screen kind of separately. Today I'm going to show you a better way. We're going to do a function or a subprogram to this, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to go def draw text. So there's our name of our subprogram. It's going to take some parameters for text, the text we're going to draw, the font we want to use, the text color we want to use, and the X and the Y position on the screen that we're going to draw it. So we've got the actual writing, the font, the color, and the X and the Y location on the screen where we want to do the writing. Then I'm going to say in here, img equals font.render. This is where we create our stamper for it, remember. Text, the actual writing we're going to use. True, because it's going to be anti-alias. And text color, the color we want to use. And then finally, we're going to stamp it onto the screen just like we did in previous times. Screen.blit, the image or the text we're going to use. And then the location, the X and the Y position on the screen. So this is basically like we've done before. Okay, what I've done is I've put this inside a subprogram. And what's the benefit of that? Well, we can now call this and draw on the screen any font. We can have multiple fonts onto the screen whenever we want to use it. Okay, so once you've created that text, let's have a go and see if we can actually draw it onto the screen. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go down inside our main loop here. So I'm going to do this after the events. So here, make sure you're indented. And this is where I'm going to be using font subprogram. Okay. And how we're going to do this, we're going to go call the name of the subprogram, which was draw_text. The parameters, we need to actually the text we want to write. Well, I want to write the word menu on the screen. The font we want to use, which is just called font at the moment. You could have font 1, font 2, font 3, etc. The color I want to use, well, I'm going to use the color white, and then the X and the Y position. So I've set mine to 350X by 25Y, so it's down from the top. Okay, and there's our first example. And if I run our subprogram, I've now got on the screen the word text menu. Okay, and it's very simply you can change that text that we want to write here. So menu, I could put my game instead here. I could change the font, I could change the color, update it, and then I've got different text on the screen. Okay, so now we've got that subprogram. I can literally just do another one if I wanted to. I could do draw text underneath and write a different message, a different position on the screen. We can draw as much text as we want on the screen in different positions now. Okay, so that's a very handy little subprogram to have. Okay, so we've got our text on the screen. Let's get on and see if we can do some images for the buttons. Okay, so last lesson we looked at using code to load a sprite image and put it into a sprite and then put it onto the screen. Today we're going to look at how to use it for a button. To do this, we're going to actually create a class for the button. Okay, so we can actually do things with it, like click on it and draw it and lots of things. Okay, so I'm going to create a new class here called class button. Okay, and all classes have got to have a constructor class method inside. So def __ init __ as we do normally, and we're going to pass some attributes into it. So self, because we always need that. We're going to give an X and the Y position for our button. We're going to have the image we're going to use for the button, and we're also going to give a scale option, so we can resize the scale of the image or the button using the transform that we used last lesson as well. So these are our properties, or sorry, our attributes. To start with, we're going to get the width of the button, the image we're going to use. So image.get_width will get the width, and the height will be image.get_height. That will get the width and the height of our image that we're going to use for the button. That's very important so we can create and use it and things. Okay. Next, we are going to transform the image to the right size that we want it, just like we did last lesson. So I'm going to go self.image equals pygame.transform.scale. Okay, we transformed last lesson. We're using a scale option to do this. So how are we going to use this? I'm going to say the image we want to transform is image, which is being passed in here. So it's being passed into our class when we're creating it, constructing it. And then to scale the image, I'm going to say, just trust me on this and I'll explain, I'm going to multiply the width of the image by the scale. Okay? And I'm going to do the same with the height. Height multiplied by scale. And then close brackets. And another close bracket at the end. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 brackets open, so we need 3 brackets closed. Okay, so what's this doing? Well, we're going to have a value for the scale. 1 would be 100% full-sized. 0.5 would be half the size or half the scale, etc. Okay, or 1.5 would be even bigger, 150%. So it's going to multiply the width and the height by the scale value that we are passing in. So when we create it, and that's going to modify the transform the scale of the image. Okay, right, what we're going to do next. As always, if we're doing sprites, we're going to do self.rect, self image.getRect. So it's going to create a rectangle surface for it to do on. And we're also going to set the top left position of the button to our X and Y coordinates. Okay, so that's going to set the top left corner to the X and Y position, so we can move it around where we want to on the screen. And finally, I'm going to do self.clicked equals false. So I'm using a property here, which is saying, has the button been clicked on? No, to start with. So I'm setting a property that we can use to say if the button's been clicked on, yes or no. In this case, the button hasn't been clicked on when it's first been loaded. Okay, so that is our init, our initiation constructor class. Right, we now need to actually draw the button. So I'm going to go def draw, oops, self, and the surface, we need to know the surface that we are drawing the button onto. And let's just write this code out and I'll explain. We're going to have an action equals false, because at the moment the button's not been done anything with. And we also need the position of where the mouse is, so that we'll be able to detect if the mouse has actually clicked on the button or not. So I'm going to get the mouse position ready to use. And what we're going to do then is we're going to check to see if the user has actually clicked on the button or not. So I'm going to go if self.rect.collide point with the mouse. So has the mouse position collided and clicked on the rectangle surface basically we've drawn? And then I'm going to go if pygame.mouse.get_pressed 0. So basically, if we've clicked on it, we are then going to, if that equals 1, so if the mouse has clicked on it and self.clicked equals false, so we're checking to see if the mouse has clicked on it and it's already been set to false, then I'm going to go self.clicked equals true. So we're changing this Boolean variable from false to true to show that the button has been clicked on. And we're setting the action of the button to true as well. Okay, so we're going to return that action at the end to show that the button has been clicked on. Okay, we also need to check now, after we've done that, we're going to return the value to false again. So basically we're going to reset it, so if the mouse is not clicking on it, if pygame.mouse.get_pressed, so the same code again, 2 S's, 0 equals 0. So if they're not clicking on it, we're going to reset this self.clicked to equal false. So when the mouse is clicking on it, we're turning it to true, and when the mouse isn't clicking on it, we're turning it to false. But this one's important here because we're going to return this action to show that the button has actually been clicked on beyond the action itself. And then finally, this is important, we need to actually display the button on the screen, surface.blit, and we're going to blit the self.image, the image that's been loaded, and we need to blit it in the right position. So we're going to go self.rect x and self.rect y, close bracket, close bracket. So that is going to blit or stamp to the screen the image that we've chosen in the right x and y coordinates of the rectangle that we've created. Okay, now be careful with the alignment with this. We've got an if statement here, and we've got two sub selections inside, and then the surface one is in the main line going down here. Okay, so let's make sure those are done correctly. Okay, so we have our class here ready to construct a button and an action, a method to draw the button. Check that code is done first. I'm going to leave it like that on the screen so you can see it all. Pause if you need to. And when you're done, we'll continue. So we have our class for drawing the buttons, but we haven't actually used it yet. So to use our buttons, again, make sure you've got the three buttons I've given you, start, options, and exit here. Button start, button options, and button exit. All those PNGs saved in the same folder as your code, or this will not work. So outside of the class now, below it, back in the main on the left-hand side, we're going to load the images for buttons. Load images for buttons. And this code should look familiar from last tutorial. So I'm going to make a variable called start image, and we're going to go pygame.image.load the name of the image, which was button_start.png, which is that image in that folder there, button start.png. And remember from last lesson as well, we did this bit on the end where we had to go close bracket dot convert alpha. Okay, so that's going to load my start button, and guess what? I'm going to do the same thing again. Copy, paste, paste with our options image button and our exit image button. And again, making sure I'm changing the right ones here. Button options and button exit. So this is going to load our three images, our three PNGs images into our variables ready to use. Okay, so now we've loaded the images, we need to use the class up here to create them and turn them into buttons. So create button objects. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to make a new variable here to store the object in called start button. I'm going to run our class constructor here, button. I'm going to tell it if I go up here, remember our positions are X and the Y position for the button. Now these numbers you can try to start off with, but you can move them around later on. I'm going to go 300 by 125. So 300 across and then 125 down. The image of the button is start img from there, and then I'm going to go the scale, well, let's put scale 1 to start with. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm creating an object here, I'm telling it where to place it on the screen, and then I'm telling it the image and the scale to use. Okay, so that's my start button being created as an object. I'm now going to do the same thing, copy, paste, paste, but with my options button, options, and options. But remember, I'm going to change the Y position so it's moved down the screen. There it is, okay? And finally, the same thing for my exit button. Exit. So I've got my three buttons being created there, and I'm going to move that one down to the next screen. So 125, 225, and 325. So I've loaded my 3 images and I've created 3 button objects to use there. Now if I run my code, you'd expect now 3 buttons on the screen. But at the moment there's nothing there. Why is that? Well, we've created the button objects, but we haven't actually drawn them onto the screen yet. Okay, so all the drawing of things, remember, is being done in our main loop down here, inside our run loop. So I've got my draw text here. Underneath that, I'm going to add the code to actually draw the buttons. So remember, in our button class here, look, our button class, we've got a draw method. That is the one we need to use to draw them onto the screen, the button method for draw. How do we do that? So down here in our code, I'm going to go start button, which is our first button, dot draw, and the surface I'm going to draw it onto is screen. So I'm running the start button object, I'm running the method for the button class called draw, and I'm telling it the surface that I want to draw it in to pass it into. Okay, now if I run that now, let's have a look now. I've got a button on my screen. However, notice, look, the size of this button. This is a big button. Okay, and that's because at the moment I've left the button at its original size. Its scale is 1. Okay, so if we go back to our code now, okay, it's being drawn down here, but if I go back to where we created it, the scale 1 here, I'm now going to drop that down to 0.5. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with these ones here. Ready? 0.5, 0.5. So instead of its full size, original size, I'm going to do half size, 0.5. Now, if I run this button object, it's a bit more pleasant, a bit more suitable size in my room. Okay, but again, I've only got one button now. So in my code, where I've done start button dot draw, I'm now going to do the same thing for options button dot draw screen, and exit button dot draw screen. So I've drawn my 3 buttons, and I should have 1, 2, 3. Notice the X position is the same, but the Y position it moves down 1, 2, 5, 2, 2, 5, 3, 2, 5 on the screen. So I have my 3 buttons. The only problem is at the moment, if I click on them, nothing actually happens. Okay, so we've got our 3 button objects, but they don't respond to user interaction at the moment. So our final thing today is to get them actually to do something. Okay, so to do that, we need to invoke the actual click action. Now, if you remember up here, inside our button draw event, we've got this here. If self collide with mouse position, so if I click on it, if it collides, it should be setting or returning an action true. Okay, it should be returning an action of true. In fact, at the moment, apologies, I've just realised it doesn't, because at the bottom here, I have not gone return action. Okay, so we want to return the action here to tell it the button's actually been clicked on. So inside your draw event here, your draw function, in fact, return action. Make sure it has that at the bottom. Okay, it still won't do anything at the moment because we haven't actually told it to deal with anything with the button. So here we go. Instead of just drawing it now, we're actually going to use a condition here, an if condition. We're going to say if start button draw. Okay, so we're saying if the button has been clicked on, if the return action is clicked, we're going to do something. Well, at the moment, all I'm going to ask it to do is just print out the text to say start game. Okay, just to show it's worked. Okay, that's all I've done is I've gone if start button to draw the same code, and then underneath indented start button. Let's see what happens. So now pay attention to the console behind here. If I click on this button, it says start game, and every time I click on it, it's showing the text start game, which is showing it's responding. If I click anywhere else, it doesn't work. If I click on the button, it's responding to it. So that shows our button click event is working. Guess what? We're going to do the same thing for the options one. If options button.click.draw, print options. So that would load the options screen. And for this last one, we're going to exit the game. Make sure you put a colon at the end. Now we've already got a loop here, a run loop. Now notice this one, I've actually done it so run is set to true to start with. So to exit the loop in this game, all we got to do is turn run to false. So all I'm going to do is run equals false, which is going to exit a loop and then quit Pygame. So let's test this out. 3 menu buttons. Start shows start game. Options shows options. Exit kills the program, exits Pygame. Okay, now obviously you could have a confirmation box pop up saying, are you sure, and things, but for the minute that shows we now have a working menu system in our game. Now obviously when we do the actual game, start game, instead of printing out start game, we'd actually run the game, options will go to a different screen, etc. Okay, but this is the basis of making a menu screen, and we have got a button class, images being loaded in, click events so we can draw it on the screen, loading images again like we've done before, creating objects on the screen, and then finally displaying them on the screen or drawing them onto the screen and giving different actions depending on which button has been clicked on. Okay, so there's today's little challenge. Little thing you can do, to finish off, you can actually see if you can add some more text at the bottom to say click start, for example, at the bottom there. Here's what I made earlier. So see if you can do a second piece of text on with a different font maybe. Maybe see if you can add an extra button of your own on the screen as well, okay? So there's a little challenge. Can you add another text message? Click here to start, click start button to begin, different font, and maybe see if you can add your own button as well. See you in the next lesson when we'll look at having different screens for different options and menus.